The ship came in sideways. That was the first thing people noticed, not the smoke pouring from its engine ports, not the long black scorch marks running across its hull like claw marks from something enormous, not even the way. 3 of its 6-gun towers were bent at angles that made no mechanical sense. It was the sideways drift, slow, lazy, and wrong, that made the crew of Omega-7 stop what they were doing and stare out the observation windows. "Is that a Varric battle cruiser?" someone asked. "What's left of one," said Chief Engineer Mara. "Oh." She stood at the window with her coffee mug halfway to her mouth, watching the massive alien warship slide into docking range. The Undying Wrath. She could read the name now, translated by the station's language system into glowing letters on her visor, was one of the most feared classes of warship. The Varric Hegman. It was supposed to look sharp and deadly and perfectly maintained. Right now it looked like someone had picked it up and thrown it against a wall several times. Myra finished her coffee, then she put the mug down and started walking toward the docking bay. Behind her, the station's communication system crackled to life. Voice came through, deep, flat, and carrying the kind of cold dignity that told you the speaker was very proud and currently very unhappy about asking for help. Omega-7 station, this is Commander VTH Kalos of the Varric Hegman warship. Undying Wrath, we require repair services. We expect full discretion. Standard galactic repair contracts and completion within 30 cycles. Respond. The station's diplomatic officer, Ambassador Derricury, already at the communication desk. She was a small woman with short gray hair and the calm expression of someone who had dealt with difficult people her entire career. She pressed the reply button without hesitating. "Commander VTH Kalos, this is Omega-7. We receive you. Please bring your ship into Bay 6. We'll have a team ready." A pause. "Bay 6, the commander repeated. He made it sound like an insult. "It's our largest bay," Dar said pleasantly. "You'll need it." The Undying Wrath settled into Bay 6 20 minutes later, and the full damage became visible up close. Mara walked a slow circle around the lower hull sections with her engineering tablet in hand, team fanning out behind her. They were a mixed group, men and women of different ages, wearing the same worn orange coveralls, carrying tools and scanners, and expressions of intense professional interest. The ship was enormous, even broken. It was impressive, but Mara was not looking at it the way a person looks at something impressive. She was looking at it the way a doctor looks at a patient, searching, calculating, already making lists. 7 halt breaches on the lower decks, 2 on the upper port side. The main drive core had collapsed inward, which meant the ship had been running on its backup systems for some time, probably days. 3 gun towers were structurally damaged beyond simple repair. The life support showed a red indicator on 4 decks, which explained the faint smith of sickled emergency air coming through the docking seals. "How many crew?" she called back toward the docking desk. 312. One of her junior engineers said, checking his tablet. "They report 47. Injured, 12 critical. Get med teams in there before we do anything else." "Already called them." Myra nodded and kept walking. She stopped at the largest hull breach, a ragged opening about 8 m wide on the lower starboard section. She crouched and looked at the edges. The metal was not just torn, it was burned, then frozen, then torn, Something had hit this ship with a weapon that changed temperature violently on impact. The material stress patterns were unlike anything in standard repair manuals. She took 17 photographs and sent them to her materials team. Commander VTH Koss found her there crouching beside his ship's wound like she was examining an interesting rock. He was tall, most Varric were, with the pale gray skin and angular features common to his species, dressed in a military uniform so perfectly pressed it looked painted on. He had the posture of someone who was never wrong about anything. "You are the chief engineer?" he asked. "Yes." Mara stood. She was a full head shorter than him. She did not seem to notice. "Mariasi, you have a good ship here." "Commander, someone worked hard to hurt it. It is a warship. It was in a battle." He said this as if explaining something to a child. "Right." She was already writing on her tablet again. "We in LT Unk and GT LL start with the hull breaches tonight. The drive core is going to take longer. Probably 12 cycles, 10 if we can. Fabricate the replacement housing in station rather than ordering it from the outer supply depots." V. Thalos frowned. "Communications said standard galactic contract. Standard repair for a vessel of this class is 30 cycles. I expect you to meet that standard." Mara looked up at him. "We in LT Unk and GT LL beat it." He stared at her. "That is not possible. Come back in the morning," she said. "Coffee if you have it. We don't expect you to, but the offer stands." She walked away before he could respond. Behind her, engineering team was already unloading equipment from the station's maintenance bays. Heavy cutting tools, alloy fabricators, atmospheric SUs, mobile lighting rigs that turned the dark docking bay into something bright and alive. Somebody connected a portable sound system. Music started playing, something with a strong beat and a lot of brass. The Varric crew, watching from behind the docking seals, said nothing. They had never seen a repair crew work with music before. Mara did not sleep that night. Neither did most of her senior team. There was a problem with the hull breaches, not the size of them but the material. The Varric hull plating was a proprietary alloy that Omega-7 did not stock. Standard replacement material would seal the breaches but would be weaker than the surrounding sections, which was never acceptable in a military vessel. Ordering the correct alloy from hegemony supply channels would take at least 8 cycles. Mara spent 2 hours with her materials engineer, a young man named Pavel, who barely slept under normal circumstances, going through everything they had in the station: salvage inventory, old ship hulls, decommissioned docking frames, 3 different grades of repair alloy from 3 different species supply chains. By midnight they had a formula. It was not exactly what the Ver ship used. It was something new, built from what they had in a ratio Pavel worked out on a whiteboard that ran out of space twice. Theoretically, it would be equal to the original material, possibly stronger. Possibly, Mara asked. Almost certainly. Pavel said, "What's the test?" "We make a sample plate tonight. Run it through pressure and temperature stress cycles. Check it in 6 hours. Do it by 3:00 in the morning." The sample plate had passed every test Pavel could throw at it. By 4 in the morning, the fabricators were running at full capacity, producing custom alloy panels cut to fit each hole breach exactly. By 6, first panels were being fitted into place on the Undying Wrath's lower starboard section, welded In sealed and already cooling to a solid bond, the music was still playing. Commander VTH Koss came to the docking bay at first light, as Mara had suggested. He did not bring coffee. He stood at the observation rail above Bay 6 and looked down at his ship. The 7 lower hull breaches were gone, not patch closed. The seams were clean. The surface finish was close to the original. He had to look hard to find where the repairs had been made at all. He stood there for a long time. His junior engineer, a young Varric named Sevthal, stood beside him. S.H. Sevthal had also been watching the humans work through the night, not from the observation rail, pressed as close to the docking bay windows as he could get. Fascinated in a way he wasn't entirely ready to admit. They made new hull material, Saul said quietly, from salvage parts. I watched them do it. VTH Kahlo said nothing. The alloy they used, I asked one of them about it this morning, the young one, Pavel. He showed me the formula. Sethel paused. He just showed me. I didn't ask him to. He seemed happy to. What did you say? VTA Koss asked. I didn't know what to say. I thanked him. Below them, Mara's team was already moving to the upper port breaches. The music had changed too. Something slower. They were tired now, on determination and terrible station coffee, but they were moving. They were still working. Bait Kahlos had used 17 repair docks in his military career. He had taken damaged ships to Karathi stations and Pelin orbital platforms, and twice to the Great Guild dockyards near the core systems. In every one of those places, the workers had done exactly what was contracted, no more, no less. They had worked their shifts, filed their reports, and charged by the hour. He had never seen a repair team work through the night on a ship that wasn't theirs. He had never seen one that sang to the observation rail and watched Mara. Small tired orange coveralls stained with welding marks, crouch beside the upper port hole and point at something for her team with the focused enthusiasm of someone who had just found something interesting to fix. V. Thalos, commander of the Undying Wrath, veteran of 11 campaigns, did not have words for what he was looking at. He decided he would come back tomorrow morning as well, just to see how much further they had gotten. Clears throat. Teen cycles. After the Undying Wrath arrived at Omega 7, it was still there. This was not supposed to happen. Commander VTH Koss had been very clear about 30 cycles. Mara's team had been on track to beat that by nearly half. The hull was repaired. The drive core housing had been fabricated and installed. The life support was running clean on all decks. The medical teams had cleared the last of the injured Varric crew 4 cycles ago, by every standard on every galactic repair contract ever written. The Undying Wrath was done, and yet every morning Mara's team showed up with their tools and their music and their terrible coffee and kept working. VTH Koss found Mara on the upper gun deck, standing inside the housing of the port side secondary targeting ray with half her bow body hidden in the access panel, and her voice echoing off the interior metal as she talked to someone deeper inside. What are you doing? He asked. Voice came out of the access panel, slightly muffled. Fixing your targeting relay. The targeting relay is functional. Technically. She emerged from the panel, her hair loose from its tie and a streak of grease across her forehead. She held up her tablet and showed him a graph. See this line? That's your relay response time. See how it dips here and here, under sustained fire. Conditions at high system load. That delay costs you about a third of a second per targeting cycle. VTH Kalos looked at the graph. Third of a second is within operational tolerance, sure. But it doesn't have to be. She went back into the access panel. Hand me the blue connector, please. One of her junior engineers handed her the connector. VTH Kalos stood there. He was not accustomed to being ignored. He was even less accustomed to being handed tools in a sentence clearly directed at him, and then having it turn out the tool was for someone else. Commander, he said, collecting himself, the ship is repaired. We agreed on 30 cycles. We are at 15. By any reasonable measure, you are finished. I'm finished with what was broken, Mara said from inside the access panel. I'm not finished with what's inefficient. That is not what was contracted. No, she agreed cheerfully. It isn't. A beat of silence. Then why are you doing it? The sounds of work continued from inside the access panel. Small metallic clicks and adjustments. Then, because it needed doing, hold on. I've almost got this. VTH Kalos stood in the gun deck of his own warship and waited, which was not something he did often, while a human woman tightened a connector inside his targeting relay. He was not entirely sure how this had happened. Ambassador Dercury called Mara to her office that afternoon. The ambassador's office was one of the nicer rooms on Omega 7. It had a real window looking out at open space, which was rare on a station. Actual plants in actual pots along the window ledge, which was even rarer. Dra was watering one of the plants when Mara came in, still wearing her orange coveralls. The hegemony has filed a formal inquiry, Dara said without turning around. They want to know why their flagship warship is still in our dock. Fag, Mara said, it's a battle cruiser. Their word, not mine. They're sensitive about it. Dra finished watering and set down the watering can. Mira, I need to understand what's happening in Bay 6. The ship was technically ready 8 cycles ago. My understanding is that you and your team are still working 12-hour shifts on it. Why? Mara sat down without being asked and pulled up her tablet. Can I show you something? She laid the tablet on Dar's desk and went through it methodically. The targeting relay issue, coolant loop on Deck 7 that technically worked but wasted 18% of its thermal output, enough wasted energy to power a full deck's life support, a structural brace on the port gun battery that passed all current stress tests but showed microfracture patterns that would under sustained combat fire fail within approximately 200 operational hours. A navigation calibration that was drifted just slightly off, not enough to cause problems in open space, but enough to matter in tight combat maneuvering. None of these things had been in the original damage report. None of them were Omega 7's responsibility under the contract. Every one of them was real. Dra looked at the list for a long time. If that gun battery brace fails in combat, she said quietly, everyone on that deck dies. Mara said, probably takes the adjacent deck with it. How many crew? 40, maybe 50 people, depending on battle stations. Configuration. Darl was quiet for a moment outside the window. The stars were steady and cold. You found all of this during the contracted repair work? Yes. And you couldn't just write it up in a report and hand it to the Vararic engineering team? Mara looked at her steadily. I could. they'd probably fix. Some of it, the obvious stuff, the brace. Definitely, but the relay and the coolant loop, those are subtle problems. The kind that look fine until they don't, their engineers would look at them, see clear's throat, the system is operational and move on. I know because I've seen it happen. Every species does it, not just the Varric. You fix what's broken, you don't always have the time or the angle to see what's quietly wrong. Draw picked up the tablet and looked at the list again. How much longer do you need? 6 cycles, maybe 7. Dura nodded once. She pressed her communication button and put through message to the hegemony diplomatic channel. She explained in carefully chosen words that Omega-7's engineering team had identified several structural concerns during the repair process that required attention before the vessel could be certified for active duty. He cited Galactic Safety Protocol 7 Alpha technically covered this situation if you read it with a generous interpretation and a certain amount of goodwill. Shry released the button. She looked at Mara. See 7 cycles, she said. Please don't find anything else. Mara stood up. I'll try, she said, which was not exactly a promise. Seth had started arriving at the Bay 6 work area every morning at the same time as Mara's team. Nobody had told him to stop, and after the first few days, nobody really noticed he was there anymore. He had started handing tools to people, holding panels in place while they welded, Fudge fetching parts from the supply crates with a quiet efficiency that made him useful without him trying to be. He was curious about everything, not in the polite, diplomatic way of someone who was pretending to be interested, in the urgent, witty-eyed way of someone who could not stop their own brain from asking questions. He asked Pavel about the custom alloy formula and spent 2 hours going through the material science behind it. He asked Mara's structural engineer, a large quiet man named Tobias, about the microfracture patterns in the gun battery brace and learned more about stress propagation in composite metals than he had in his entire military engineering training. He asked the junior technician fixing the coolant loop, a young woman named Yuki, who very fast and drew diagrams on any surface available, how she had spotted the thermal waste signature, and she showed him on her scanner readout and then drew a diagram on the wall of the ship with a marker before anyone could stop her. The wall of the ship with a marker. Sethel had been mildly horrified, and then had looked at the diagram and then had taken a photograph of it. On the 12th cycle, he went to Commander VTH Kalos with a carefully prepared report. It documented everything he had learned, every system improvement, every technique he had observed, every question the humans had answered without hesitation or secrecy. He had cross-referenced it against the hegemony's own engineering standards and found 14 areas where Varric military repair doctrine was measurably, provably less effective than what Mara's team was doing. VTH Kalos read the report. Silence. He read it twice. They answered all your questions, he said. Everyone, without being asked twice. The young one, Pavel, he thanked me for asking. He said it was more interesting to explain things to someone who hadn't heard it before. VTH Kalos set the report down on his desk. He was quiet for a long moment. In the hegemony fleet, he said slowly, knowledge of repair techniques and ship systems is classified by rank and clearance. You know only what you need to know for your station. Yes, Commander, I know these humans share everything with anyone who asks, even enemy ships, even me. Another silence in it. Something shifted very slightly in the commander's expression. Something that, in a different person, might have been called wondering. He picked up Sethel's report again. File this through the standard channel, he said. I will review it formally. Sethel nodded and turned to leave. Thou, he stopped. Tomorrow morning, VTH Kahlo said. When you go to the bay, I will come with you. Thou did not let himself smile until he was out of the room. The final inspection was on cycle 22, 8 cycles ahead of the original contract. Mara's team had beaten the number they promised, which was itself a number most repair docs would have called impossible. Nobody on Omega 7 seemed to think this was particularly remarkable. They were tired and they were satisfied, and they were already talking about lunch. Commander Bate Callows walked through his ship with his senior officers and his own engineering staff. He had done final inspections before on ships repaired at a dozen different docks across the galaxy. He knew what to look for. He knew the feeling of a ship that had been worked on, the slight mismatch in material finish where new met old, the quiet vibration of systems running slightly out of tune, the way newly replaced parts always did, the smell of fresh sealant that took months to fully air out. He felt none of those things. The undying wrath did not feel like a repaired ship. It felt like a ship that had always been this way, clean, smooth, running at a pitch that was impossibly slightly better than it had been before. The battle that nearly destroyed it, on the bridge, the navigation response was crisp. Targeting displays cycled faster than his gunners were used to. They kept commenting on it, surprised by their own reaction times. The drive core hummed at a frequency so even and steady that Chief Navigator Velthorn, who had served on the ship for 9 years, stood at her station with her head tilted for almost a full minute just listening. What is that? She said. The drive. VTH Kahlo said. It sounds different. Better. She tilted her head the other way. Yes, she said quietly. Better. Mara was finishing her paperwork in the Bay 6 operations room when VTH Kahlo found her. She had a cup of coffee and a data pad and a pleased, tired expression. She looks like someone who had run a long race and remembered why they liked running. Your ship is ready, Commander. She said. All systems certified. You can depart whenever you're prepared. VTH Kahlo sat down across from her. Without being invited, he put his hands flat on the table and looked at her directly in the way Ver did when they were being serious, a look that tended to make most species uncomfortable. Mar met it with calm interest. My crew, he said, found something this morning. Oh. In the lower crew quarters, texts 9 through 14. He paused. Someone repaired the interior fittings, the wall panels, the bunk frame supports. Some of the personal storage units had broken hinges. Those were fixed. The lighting panels that had been flickering since before the battle replaced. Another pause. The water reclamation unit on deck 11, the one that has produced slightly metallic tasting water for 3 years, that tastes normal now. Mara nodded slowly. We noticed those things while working through the interior systems. Those things were not in the contract. No, nobody asked you to fix them. No. VTH Kahlo stared at her. My crew's personal equipment was also repaired. Armor seals, sidearm calibrations, tools. Someone went Through the personal gear in the docking transit area and serviced everything. We had some time in the evenings. Mara said, some of my team, the ones who focus on fine mechanical work, they get restless if they don't have something in their hands. I gave them your crews gear as a side project. VTH close was quiet for a moment. That is an extraordinary amount of effort for things outside your scope. It was all just things that needed doing. But why? He said it plainly, without military dignity, just the question, direct and genuine. There is no contract line, no extra payment. You gain nothing from repairing broken hinges on the bunks of a Varric war. Why? Mara wrapped both hands around her coffee mug and thought for a moment, not stalling but choosing words carefully, because the answer mattered. You've been at sea, she said. Not literally, maybe. But you know what it's like to be far from home for a long time on a ship. Everything you have is that ship, your bunk, your gear, your workspace. If something is broken, it's broken every single day. If the water tastes wrong, it tastes wrong every morning. Little things become big things when you're far from home and can't fix them yourself. Ka said nothing. He was listening. We fix the big things because that's what we were paid for. We fix the small things because your crew has to live on that ship. They're going back out there, back into whatever did all this damage. They deserve to go back on a ship that's completely right, not just structurally right, right in the way a home should feel right. The commander sat with that for a long moment. On Varric ships, he said finally, comfort is considered secondary to operational effectiveness. I know, Mara said, most military doctrine works that way. You disagree? I think a crew that sleeps well and eats well and lives in a space that isn't quietly broken, I think that crew is more effective, not just happier, better, faster, calmer, more focused when it counts. She shrugged. But that's just my opinion. Vethel stood. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at a spot on the wall that was not particularly interesting. Then he looked back at her. The gun battery brace, he said, the one with the micro fracture. If that had failed in combat, 40 to 50 crew, Mara said, minimum. He nodded slowly, a small movement. Something behind his eyes shifted that she could not quite name. It was not gratitude exactly, because gratitude from a Varric commander was not a simple or comfortable thing. It was something more like the moment a person realizes they have been walking near the edge of something they could not see. Thank you, he said. He said it the way someone says a word they are not used to saying, carefully, meaning every letter. That's what we're here for, Mara said. Sethel was in the docking bay when VTH Kalos returned from Mara's office. The young engineer was helping Tobias, Mara's structural specialist, pack up the last of the heavy equipment crates. He had not been asked to help. He was just there lifting the heavy side of things without making a point of it, talking to Tobias in the slow, patient way he used when practicing his common tongue. VTH Kalos watched him for a moment, then he called him over. Sethel jogged across the bay, still carrying a wrench he'd forgotten to put down. VTH Kalos looked at the wrench. Sethel looked at the wrench. He set it on a nearby crate. I want to submit a formal request, Sethel said before VTH Kalos could speak. He had clearly been building up to this for some time. Transfer request to Omega-7. As an exchange engineer, I know it is unusual. I know there is no clear hegemony protocol for it, but there is a lot to learn here, and I believe the information would be of genuine military value, and I know VTH Kahlo, said Sefthel. Stopped. I read your report, VTH Kahlo said, the one about repair techniques. 14 areas where our doctrine is less effective. He paused. I sent it up the command chain this morning with my personal endorsement. Sethel stared at him. You did submit the transfer request through the proper channels. I will support it. VTH Kaz glanced across the bay toward the operations room, where the light was still on, where Mara Ose was probably still doing paperwork and drinking bad coffee. Learn everything they are willing to teach you. They seem willing to teach quite a lot. Sethel stood up straighter. He looked like someone trying very hard not to show exactly how happy he was. Yes, Commander. VTH Kahlo's turn to go, then stopped. He turned back, or thing. Commander. He reached into his uniform jacket and produced a small sealed container. Varric made Milidarira pressure seal on the top. He held it out. This is Vararic field grade stimulant brew. It is significantly stronger than what this station calls coffee. The chief engineer. She works too long on too little sleep. Give it to her. Tell her it is from the ship. Sethel took the container carefully, as if it might break. From the ship, he repeated. Yes. Cal straightened his jacket. Not from me, from the ship. He walked away. His posture was perfect as always, but there was something lighter about it, some small quiet things this in the set of his shoulders that had not been there 22 cycles ago, when a broken warship came in sideways and a small woman in orange coveralls had looked at the damage and laughed. Esthal looked down at the container in his hands. Then he looked across the bay toward the operations room light. He went to deliver it. Word traveled fast in space. If you knew the right channels, it moved through diplomatic encrypted lines and military communication relays and informal but surprisingly efficient network of ship captains who talked to each other in neutral ports while their crews refueled and their officers tended not to share classified information. It moved through trader gossip in station bars, through maintenance reports that got passed up command chains, through the quiet but persistent conversations of crew members who had been to Omega-7 and come back talking about it. The story of the undying wrath spread in pieces the way all good stories do. Different people told different parts. The Varric crew talked about the hull alloy, how humans had built something new overnight from pieces of old ships, and how it was stronger than the original. The engineers talked about the targeting relay and the coolant loop, the quiet, careful work of finding problems that nobody had named yet. The deck crew talked about the water on Deck 11 that tasted normal now, and the flickering lights that were gone, and the hinges that swung smooth and silent in a corridor that had rattled and stuck for years. The military command of the hegemony received VTH Kahlo's formal report and filed it under notable foreign technical capability. Further review. Senior admirals read it, one of them read it twice. None of them for the moment did anything about it, but they remembered it. Chathai came first. The Crothai were large, slow, speak-aching, and deeply practical. Their dreadnoughts were the biggest warships in the contested rim, not the fastest or the most sophisticated, built with a density of armor and firepower that made them nearly impossible to kill. Their engineering doctrine, valued durability. Above everything else, they did not usually use outside repair facilities. Their pride was in maintaining their own ships in their own docks by their own people, but one of their dreadnoughts, the Iron Shore, happened to suffer a collision with a rogue asteroid near the outer edge of Omega-7 sector. The damage was real: a cracked forward sensor array and a bent docking pylon. But it was also, by Koretsi standards, minor, the kind of thing their own engineers could fix in 4 or 5 cycles if they had the right materials. They did not have the right materials on board. Omega-7 was close. The Sharathi captain sent a careful formal request. He specified exactly what he needed. He was very clear that he only needed those things and nothing else. He gave a timeline of 4 cycles. Mara's team did the sensor array and the docking pylon in 2 cycles. Then they asked if they could look at the power distribution grid while the ship was docked. The Krothi captain said yes because it seemed rude to say no. 2 more cycles later, the Iron Shore departed with a power grid that ran 23% more efficiently than it had on arrival. The Karathi captain filed a very long report to his Admiralty. He tried to explain what had happened, which was difficult because nothing had gone wrong. Everything had simply gone more right than expected. In the end, he wrote, the humans at Omega-7 appear to find fault in systems that appear faultless. This is not a complaint. I am uncertain what it is. The Krothi Admiralty filed his report. Under further review required. The Pelin freighter came 3 weeks after the Iron Shore left. The Pelins were not military. They were traders, a small, quick species who moved cargo between the mid-M systems in battered but reliable ships that they kept running through a combination of genuine mechanical and a refusal to accept that anything was permanently broken. Freighter clears throat. Distant shore came to Omega-7 with a blown secondary engine and a navigation computer that had been giving slightly wrong answers for so long that the crew had started doing manual correction in their heads. Automatically, Mara's team fixed the engine, then they fixed the navigation computer. Then, after the Pelin captain, a compact woman named Isa invited Mara aboard for dinner as a thank you, and Mara sat at the crew table and looked at the ship around her with the automatic, unconscious attention of someone who cannot stop assessing structures. They asked if they could take a look at the cargo hold support framing. Isa said, sure, and poured more of whatever the Pelins drank. The cargo hold support framing had a problem. It was not obvious. It was not yet dangerous, but under the loading pattern the distant shore used for its most common cargo routes, heavy ore containers stacked 4 deep, there was a stress point in the central crossbeam that was slowly, quietly accumulating damage. At the current rate under standard loading, it would fail in approximately 8 months. When it failed, the cargo hold would collapse inward in deep space with no warning. Mara's team reinforced the framing in 1 work cycle. They did not charge extra. They wrote it into the repair invoice as a structural assessment note, a standard safety check, and charged only for materials. Isa stood in the reinforced cargo hold after and looked at it for a long time. Then she went and found Mara. 8 months. She said. He says 8 months. Approximately. Could have been 6. Could have been 10. Hard to be exact. There are 11 people on the ship. I know. Isa looked at her. The Pelins were not known for being emotional in public. They considered it rude, but something moved across her face that was very close to the edge of something large. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was very even. "You're welcome," Mara said. "Safe travels." The distant shore left Omega-7 and went back to its trade routes 8 months later, almost exactly 8 months, as it turned out. A heavily loaded ore run through the Palin mid-rim would have put exactly the kind of stress on that cross beam that Mara had calculated. Instead, the beam held. The cargo hold was fine, and 11 people got home. None of them knew what had not happened. Mara never knew the exact outcome either. She was already working on the next ship. The Galactic Repair Guild sent its formal complaint 4 months after the Undying Wrath departed. The guild was old. It had existed for longer. The most current species had been space faring. It set the standards for ship repair across the known galaxy. The contract templates, the pricing structures, the certification requirements, the scope definitions that determined exactly what a repair dock was responsible for and exactly what it was not. Centuries these standards had kept things orderly and predictable and profitable. Omega-7, the guild's formal complaint stated, was in violation of scope standards, specifically the unauthorized modification of client vessels beyond contracted repair work, the unsolicited servicing of crew, personal equipment, the practice of identifying and correcting non-contracted system inefficiencies. All of this, the complaint argued, was outside the bounds of standard galactic repair practice and constituted unfair disruption to the established market. Ambassador Derricury read the complaint. Over her morning coffee, she read it twice, then she wrote a 5-word reply. "Come inspect the ships yourself." Guild sent 2 inspectors, senior ones. They had decades of experience between them and had certified repair across 47 different space stations. They came to Omega-7 with official clipboards and official skepticism and the quiet authority of people who had found problems everywhere they had ever looked. They spent 3 days going through the records. They interviewed Mara's engineers. They reviewed the work done on the Undying Wrath, the Iron Shore, the Distant Shore, and 4 other vessels that had come through Omega-7. The month since, they examined the documentation, the material logs, the signed client acknowledgments, the safety assessment notes. Then they went home. They did not file the complaint. They did not explain why. The Guild Senior Counsel received a brief report that said only standards review ongoing. Recommend observation period. One of the inspectors in his private notes, never officially filed, wrote a single line: "I have been inspecting repair facilities for 31 years. I have never seen a dock that made ships better than new. I don't know what regulation to apply to that. I'm not sure regulation is the right response." Sethel's official transfer to Omega-7 was approved 6 weeks after the Undying Wrath departed. He arrived with 2 equipment cases, a box of Varick technical manuals, and a container of field-grade stimulant brew as a personal gift for Mara. Tried it on his first morning and spent the rest of the day vibrating slightly and getting an exceptional amount of work done. He joined the team quietly. He was good with hands and better with his head. And he asked questions that were sometimes so precise they made the humans stop what they were doing and think for a moment before answering. Yuki, the fast-talking technician who drew on walls, declared him her favorite person on the station within the first week, which he found both flattering and slightly alarming. He sent reports back to the Hegman every 2 weeks, long reports, detailed ones about material science and repair technique, and the particular human habit of not stopping when the contracted job was done. The reports were read by the same 3 senior admirals who had read VTH Kahlo's report. 2 of them were now rereading both reports together, side by side, looking for something they couldn't quite name, a pattern, a principle, a reason why, in a galaxy full of repair facilities, ships kept coming back to one human station in the middle of nowhere and leaving better than they arrived. The 3rd admiral had already done something about it. She had quietly rerouted one of her ships, her personal flagship, to the outer rim. She had told its captain only that she wanted to see something for herself. The ship arrived without announcement, no distress signal, no damage report, no formal docking request through the standard relay channels. It simply appeared at the edge of Omega-7 sensor range and moved toward the station at a slow, deliberate pace that said clearly it was not in a hurry and did not need to pretend otherwise. It was enormous, bigger than the undying wrath by a significant margin. Its hull was dark gray, almost black, with the kind of finish that came from extremely high-end maintenance, every surface clean and even, every panel fitting perfectly against the next. It carried no visible battle damage. Its weapon systems were not active but were present in a way that communicated simply and without effort that they existed and were real. Anita in Varric military script was a name that Cethel translated the moment it appeared on the station's identification screen. He went directly to Mara's office. "That's the Sovereign Reach," he said. Mara looked up from her desk. "Should I know that name?" Cethel sat down in the chair across from her. "It is the personal flagship of Grand Admiral VTH Mara, Supreme Commander of the 3rd Varric Fleet. She has never lost a battle. She has served in the hegemony military for 42 years. He paused. "She is also VTH Kahlo's commanding officer." Mara looked at her coffee, then at Seth, then back at her coffee. "Is the ship damaged?" she said. "No." "Is she requesting repair services?" "No formal request has come through. She's just coming in." Mara stood up, smoothed her orange coveralls, picked up her engineering tablet out of habit. "All right," she said. "Let's go meet her." Grand Admiral VTH Mara was not what Mara had expected, which was itself not a surprise, because Mara had learned long ago that the most impressive people rarely were. She was older than VTH Kas by 20 years, which in Varric terms meant she carried an extra layer of stillness, the kind that came from a very long time of making decisions that mattered. Her uniform was identical to every other Varric military uniform, except for the rank insignia, which was understated rather than elaborate, as if she had nothing left to prove about who she was. She walked through Omega-7's docking bay with her hands behind her back and her eyes moving continuously, watching everything, showing nothing about what she thought of it. Mara met her at the bay entrance and introduced herself. The Grand Admiral shook her hand. She had clearly researched human greeting customs and said she was sorry for arriving without proper notice, and it was not an inconvenience. "We always have room," Mara said. Grand Admiral's eyes moved briefly across the organized busyness of the bay, ships in various stages of repair. Mara's team moving between them with their usual combination of noise and competence, Yuki explaining something on a whiteboard to two Karathi technicians who had stayed on long after their ship departed and were now improbably becoming regulars. I wanted to see it. The Grand Admiral said simply, I have read many reports. I wanted to see for myself. Walk with me then, Mara said. They spent 2 hours going through the station. Mara showed her everything. Without being asked, the fabrication rooms were custom, alloy panels were being built for a Palan military escort that had come in the week before. Print. The materials lab where Pavel was working on a new thermal bonding technique with 3 engineers from 2 different species looking over his shoulder and arguing pleasantly. She showed her the structural assessment bay, where Tobias had a ship's framing section laid out on a long table, explaining to a group of Varric engineers, official ones sent by the hegemony in direct response to Seth's reports, exactly how to read micro propagation patterns. The Grand Admiral watched all of it. She asked precise technical questions. Mara answered them. When Mara did not know the specific answer, she called over the person who did, and they answered directly, and the Grand Admiral listened to everything with the focused attention of someone doing mental calculations that went far beyond the technical. The end of the tour, Mara took her to the observation deck. It was the best spot on the station, a wide curved window looking out at open space, no artificial light in the room, just the stars and the distant slow glow of the nearest sun. 2 chairs sat near the window with a small table between them. Someone had left 2 cups, coffee for Mara, Varric field brew for the Admiral, because Cethel had thought ahead and prepared for this moment hours before it happened. They sat. The Grand Admiral looked at the stars for a long while. Then she asked the question, not the small practical version of it, the full one, the one that had been forming in her mind across months of reading reports, sending inspectors quietly, rerouting her own flagship to the edge of the contested rim. Why do you do this? She did not explain the question. She did not need to. They both understood what she was asking. Mara was quiet for a moment, not because she did not have an answer, because she was deciding how to say it to someone who had spent her entire life in a military structure where every action was tied to a strategic purpose. Every resource spent was justified by an outcome. Every decision made was measured against what it gained. She leaned forward and pointed at the window. See those ships? She said. Out in the docking approaches, 3 vessels were visible, 1 Karathi heavy carrier in the outer approach lane, 1 small Palan escort waiting for its bay assignment, and at the far edge of sensor range, the faint lights of something larger coming in from the trade routes. Every ship out there has people in it. And GT, great. And GT, going somewhere, coming back from somewhere, trying to get home or trying to get to the next place, trying to finish the thing they came out here to do. She sat back, and sometimes the thing keeping them from getting where they're going is a broken hinge or a coolant loop that wastes 18% of its thermal output, or the beam in a cargo hold that is going to fail in 8 months and kill 11 people who don't know they're in danger. She looked at the Grand Admiral. We fix those things, not Because there's a contract for all of them, because they're there to fix. We can fix them, and if we don't, nobody will. That's it. That's the whole reason. The Grand Admiral was quiet. Outside, the stars did not move. In the hegemony, she said, we have a concept. It translates roughly as strategic empathy. Understanding your enemy well enough to predict them. It is used exclusively as a tactical tool. I know the concept. Mara said, most militaries have a version of it. You are doing something different. The Grand Admiral's voice was careful, measuring, studying these ships to gain advantage over them. You are not building relationships for future leverage. You are simply. She paused for the first times. She looked like someone searching for a word she had not needed before, caring about strangers, about enemy ships, about people you will never meet on vessels that belong to civilizations that have, in some cases, fought against yours. Yes, Mara said. Why? Mara picked up her coffee cup and looked at it. It was a plain white mug. The station logo on the side had mostly faded. She had been using it for 3 years. We have a saying, she said, very old. If a job is worth doing, it's worth doing right. She set the mug down. But I think the thing under that saying, the reason humans came up with it, is this. We don't like leaving things broken when we don't have to. It bothers us. It sits in the back of our heads and it itches. A cracked thing, wrong thing, a thing that is less than it could be. It bothers us until it's fixed. That's just how we are. She shrugged. It was a small gesture for something that was, she realized, not small at all. Out here, Admiral, in space, away from home, the middle of whatever everyone is out here doing, there are a lot of broken things, and we happen to be very good at fixing them, so we do. The Grand Admiral sat with that for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than it had been all day. The gun battery brace, she said, on the Undying Wrath, VTH Kalos told me about it. 40 to 50 crew minimum, Mara said. Yes, those were Varric soldiers. Hegemony. Military. She turned from the window and looked at Mara directly. Not your people, not your war. No, Mara said. But you fixed it. We fixed it. Another silence, long enough that the new ship on the sensor range, the large one coming in slow from the trade routes, had moved close enough to be visible through the observation window. It was a Carathi dreadnought, not the Iron Shore, a different one, bigger. The Grand Admiral looked at it, then she looked at Mara. How long, she said, would a voluntary refit of my flagship take? Mara turned to look at the Sovereign reach through the bay windows below, pristine, enormous, perfectly maintained, and tilted her head the way she always did when she was starting to see a ship as a set of possibilities rather than a machine. I want to do a full assessment first, she said. But a ship that size and that condition, 2 weeks to go through it properly, maybe 3. If we find anything interesting. And will you find anything interesting? Mara smiled. It was the smile of someone who had never once walked through a ship and not found something worth improving. We always do, she said. The Sovereign reached docked in the outer bay that evening. Below in Bay 6, Mara's team got to work on the assessment. The music went on, the lights came up, the voices and the arguments and the occasional burst of laughter filled the docking space the way they always did. Seth worked beside them now, indistinguishable from the rest, handing tools without being asked and asking questions that made everyone stop and think. In the years since the Undying, Wrath had drifted in sideways and broken Stephenton alien warships had docked at Omega-7. Of those 17, 9 had stayed beyond their contracted repair time, not because they were not finished, but because they were not ready to leave, not yet. Not while there was still something Myra's team wanted to show them, or something one of their engineers wanted to learn, or simply because a station that treated your ship like it mattered was a harder thing to sail away from than any of them had expected. Word had spread in the way that words do, through military channels and trade routes, and the long, quiet conversations of crews who had been to a place and come back different, not damaged and repaired. Different, simply different, in the way that finding out someone has treated your broken thing with more care than you expected leaves a mark that is difficult to name and possible to forget. The Galactic Repair Guild had not yet decided what to do about Omega-7. The complaint was still on the Council's desk, technically pending. Practically forgotten. Clear's throat. The 2 inspectors who had come to look had gone home and never filed it, and when the junior council members asked why, the senior ones simply said the situation was under ongoing review and changed the subject. There were no regulations for what Mara's team was doing, no category for it, no pricing structure or contract template or scope definition that covered a repair dock where the workers sang at 3:00 in the morning and fixed the water on a stranger's ship because it tasted wrong. The galaxy did not yet have the right words for it, but the ships kept coming, and they kept leaving better than they arrived, and slowly, in the way that facts accumulate into understanding, the universe was beginning to learn something about the species that had built Omega-7, something that had very little to do with weapons or politics or strategic advantage. They just did not like leaving things broken, and in a cold and calculating galaxy, it turned out that was more powerful than anyone had expected.